After the successful ambush at the Arar River, where Julius Caesar and his legions decisively struck a vulnerable portion of the Helvetii as they crossed the river, the Roman general knew his work was far from over. The Helvetii, although bloodied and temporarily shaken, had managed to continue their migration, regrouping with the remainder of their forces on the other side of the river. But Caesar wasn't about to let them slip away. He had no intention of allowing this large confederation of Gauls to roam freely through Gaul and pose a future threat to Roman interests. The Helvetii, realizing the threat Caesar posed, had increased the pace of their movement. Their goal remained the same: to find new lands in western Gaul beyond the reach of Roman control. However, the Battle of the Arar had instilled a new sense of urgency in their leaders. They now understood that Caesar would relentlessly pursue them if given the chance, and any misstep could lead to another disastrous encounter with the well-disciplined Roman legions. They had no time to lose. But Caesar, as always, was not one to sit idly by. After his victory at the Arar, he wasted no time reorganizing his forces. He knew the Helvetii had no intention of engaging in a full-scale battle just yet. They were still in a defensive posture, seeking to escape rather than confront his legions in a pitched battle. Caesar recognized that he needed to force them into a decisive engagement, and he had the advantage of superior mobility and discipline. His legions, though fewer in number than the Helvetii, were far more organized and capable of long marches. Caesar's decision to pursue the Helvetii led to a series of skirmishes as he harassed their rear guard, preventing them from gaining any substantial distance. His intention was clear: to slow them down, to exhaust them, and eventually to bring them to a point where they had no choice but to fight on his terms. His legions moved with precision, shadowing the Helvetii's every move, cutting off supply routes and making it clear that there would be no escape. Meanwhile, the Helvetii, burdened with their non-combatants, livestock and wagons full of supplies, could not match the speed of the Roman legions. They knew that they couldn't outrun Caesar indefinitely. As the days wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll on their people. Morale started to falter. The once bold confederation of tribes now found itself on the defensive, constantly looking over its shoulder, knowing that Caesar was closing in. As the Helvetii pressed forward, they found themselves nearing the hill town of Bibracte, the principal settlement of the Ep2, a Gallic tribe that had allied itself with Rome. Bibracte, situated on a high plateau, was an imposing sight, a fortified town, rich in resources and strategically important. It was here, in the shadow of Bibracte, that the Helvetii finally realized they had run out of options. They could not flee any farther without risking complete exhaustion. A confrontation with Caesar was now inevitable. For Caesar, the approach to Bibracte presented the perfect opportunity to finish what he had started at the Arar. The Helvetii were in a weakened state, their forces stretched thin from weeks of marching and their morale fragile after the constant Roman harassment. Caesar knew that a decisive victory here would not only end the Helvetii migration, but also send a powerful message to the other Gallic tribes. Rome would not tolerate any challenge to its authority. The final lead-up to the battle began with a skirmish. The Helvetii, realizing the Romans were right behind them, attempted to gain an advantageous position by occupying a nearby hill. They hoped that the high ground would give them a defensive edge. Caesar, ever the strategist, ordered his legions to halt and set up camp at the base of the hill. He did not intend to rush into battle recklessly. Instead, he wanted to control the terms of the engagement, knowing that patience and discipline would be his greatest allies. The night before the battle was tense. The Roman camp was abuzz with preparation. Soldiers repaired armor, sharpened their swords, and ensured their shields were ready for the coming fight. Caesar moved among his men, offering words of encouragement. His presence alone inspired confidence. These were hardened veterans, men who had fought in brutal conditions and knew that they were part of a well-oiled military machine. They trusted Caesar's judgment implicitly, knowing that under his leadership they had the upper hand. Across the field, the Helvetii were preparing in their own way. They knew the Romans would attack, but they also knew they had the advantage of numbers. Though they had suffered losses at the Arras, they still had tens of thousands of warriors capable of fighting. Their chieftains tried to rally the troops, reminding them of their ancestors' valour and urging them to defend their people and families. But underneath the speeches and war cries, there was doubt. The Roman legions were unlike any enemy they had faced before, and Caesar's relentless pursuit had sapped their strength. As dawn broke over the Gallic countryside, the tension in the air was palpable. Caesar wasted no time. He knew that an early attack would catch the Helvetii off guard. His legions advanced with the precision that had come to define the Roman army. The Helvetii, for their part, were ready. They formed a massive line at the foot of the hill, stretching across the battlefield. Their numbers were impressive, but Caesar's men knew that discipline and coordination would win the day. The opening phase of the battle was fierce. The Helvetii, relying on their superior numbers, attempted to overwhelm the Roman lines with a series of charges. Their warriors, shouting war cries and brandishing swords, axes and spears, hurled themselves at the Roman shields. But the Romans, ever disciplined, held their ground. The famous Roman testudo, or tortoise formation, provided them with a near impenetrable defence. Their large rectangular shields locked together, creating a wall of steel and wood that absorbed the Helveti's initial onslaught. As the Helveti's first charge faltered, Caesar ordered his legions to counterattack. The Roman soldiers, wielding their short gladi with deadly precision, surged forward in a coordinated push. The Helvetii, caught off guard by the sudden shift in momentum, began to fall back. For all their bravery and numbers, they lacked the organization to withstand the relentless Roman advance. Caesar's legions, trained for close-quarters combat, systematically cut down the Gallic warriors, pressing them back toward their camp. The battle raged for hours. The Helvetii, desperate to turn the tide, launched several counterattacks, but each one was repelled by the disciplined Roman formations. Caesar's men were relentless, pushing the Helvetii farther and farther from the battlefield. The turning point came when Caesar ordered his cavalry to outflank the Helvetii and cut off their escape route. With the Roman cavalry closing in from the rear and the legions pressing forward from the front, the Helvetii found themselves trapped. Panic set in among the Gallic ranks. What had started as an organized defense quickly turned into a rout. The Helveti's warriors, realizing they were surrounded, began to break formation and flee in all directions. Caesar's cavalry, riding down the fleeing Gauls, ensured that few would escape. The battlefield, once filled with the clash of steel and the roar of battle, became eerily quiet as the last pockets of Helvetii resistance were crushed. By the end of the day, the Helveti's hopes of finding a new homeland had been utterly destroyed. Thousands lay dead on the battlefield, and the survivors, men, women and children, were taken prisoner by the Romans. Caesar, ever the pragmatic leader, treated the survivors with a degree of mercy. He allowed them to return to their homeland, but under strict conditions. The Helvetii would no longer pose a threat to Rome. The Battle of Bibracte was a decisive victory for Caesar. Not only had he defeated a formidable Gallic confederation, but he had also solidified his reputation as a brilliant military commander. News of his victory spread quickly throughout Gaul, and other tribes, seeing the fate of the Helvetii, began to rethink their stance toward Rome. For Caesar, the road ahead was clear. The conquest of Gaul had only just begun. As Caesar surveyed the battlefield, he knew that this victory, like the one at the Arras, would serve as a foundation for his future campaigns. The Gallic War was far from over, but with each battle, Caesar was securing his legacy. The Helvetii, once a powerful confederation, had been humbled. The other Gallic tribes, who had watched from the sidelines, now faced a choice. Resist Rome or submit? Caesar, ever calculating, knew that this victory was not just a military triumph, it was a message to all of Gaul. And so, with the Helvetii defeated and the Aedui firmly on Rome's side, Caesar turned his attention to the next phase of his campaign. The conquest of Gaul would be long and arduous, but with victories like Bibracte, Caesar knew that the prize was within his grasp.